It's Phil again. Yes, the Polygon interview also included details of, well, is it details or is it more hinting from Phil about what he sees a handheld Xbox looking like? Oliver, thoughts?
To me, reading through this interview, it sounds like there are two proposals here, or two proposals that overlap quite a lot. It sounds like he wants to release a dedicated Xbox handheld of some kind, and also a better front end for PC handhelds. And that dedicated Xbox handheld could be running similar software configuration, or maybe a more classic console platform, or somewhere in between, right? That's sort of my read on it. And I think if you go from our, discussion earlier, when it comes to game availability, if it had that ability to run Windows software, that would be very compelling as well. I think it's a really cool idea. I've always loved the idea of a more premium handheld console. Obviously, Nintendo has shown that you can do a really nice semi-premium console, but if you had that a little bit aimed at the higher end, able to play more traditional console software, that would be really compelling, I think, higher end software. And
The PSP model,
PSP model,
Vita model.
Vita model, yeah.
I mean,
And I think that he has a good sense of where the limitations of the current Windows handhelds are. Because if you look at a device like the ROG Ally, I think the hardware is quite good, but obviously the software experience is not so good. It's kind of a mishmash of
oh yeah,
overlays with traditional Windows, really small interface elements, a small touch screen display, and touchscreens and Windows don't mix that well nowadays. And you have to move the cursor with the thumbstick. And when you compare that to what Nintendo, or rather what Valve has done with the Steam Deck, there's definitely a sense that Valve nailed all that stuff. You have a perfect front-end interface combined with great overlays, all kinds of toggles. It just works magically. It's so great. It's the perfect hybrid, I think, of a console platform and a PC platform. And then also you still have that left and right touchpad that can serve in for cursor support as needed, because you do need that backup sometimes. So I think that that's definitely a good way to go. And when you look at the current state of the PC and what could be adapted for a handheld, I think the current Steam big picture interface is very good, but that has its own limitations. It's basically a clone of the Steam Deck UI. So something along those lines could be good if it was more comprehensive. And I think that's kind of the direction I'd like to see it go. But certainly this is one of those things that could go out in a million different directions. I'm just presuming, again, reading the tea leaves in this one, that he is referring to an experience that would translate onto these existing Windows handhelds, and then something that could work for a dedicated Xbox device down the line as well.
Interesting. John?
yeah. My thoughts are similar to Oliver and the stuff we've talked about in the past. Where basically embracing the Steam Deck model, which get an OS in there that feels properly customized for playing games, that feels like a real console-like experience while still allowing sort of an open-ended back end to the system itself. And I also think this, so I did mention PSP and Vita, but I guess the issue with those was that it was the old style model where resources were split between handheld and console, and obviously they couldn't. The PSP was well supported, but not the Vita, and I don't think Sony could actually do both at the same time. Nintendo obviously shifted to a single model. It would be curious if Xbox, and I'm not sure they would do it necessarily, but if the handheld became like the Xbox platform, that would kind of create a different, or at least if everything that was released for Xbox had to run on that handheld, then that kind of creates another Nintendo-like situation. And so now you have two makers creating these handhelds where all the games need to target these handhelds, which kind of changes the scope of what developers can do to some degree, which, given the amount of issues with budgets spinning out of control and just development resources, maybe that's not so bad if it takes things back a little bit. So I feel like a lot of stuff has been learned that you can still do a lot with fewer resources and maybe do it more efficiently. I don't know. It changes the market a little bit too if two of the players are all in on these handheld devices. And I'm curious what that would mean for PlayStation as well.
Well, I'm looking at the interview with Polygon here, and Phil's got a sort of laundry list of stuff that he'd like to happen on a handheld, and it's basically that. Well, it really does sound as though he wants the Xbox ecosystem to be fully transferable over in the same way that it is between, say, Xbox One and Xbox Series consoles, right? You can start a game on Xbox One and you can finish it on Xbox Series with, improve performance and whatnot, but fundamentally your saves are going to work, and you've got that continuity between the whole ecosystem over the whole platform. And he's talking about scenarios here like he can play Fallout 76 on his handheld PC. Seems to have a Legion Go at the moment, which is there. I've got one too. But yeah, it's not basically doing the job in terms of fully plumbing into the Xbox ecosystem. So I think it would need a proper Xbox client, and it would need to run the Xbox versions of the game, therefore, which kind of brings us back to the thing that you've been talking about probably for months now, John, which is the concept of the Xbox VM working on a PC. And, that would kind of do the job.
Monkey paw moment, though. They bring back Games for Windows Gold, like Games for Windows Live, I guess it is. And that's the interface.
Or UWP.
Oh, no.
Because they've tried it, right? UWP, you could play the same games on an Xbox, you could play them on a tablet, you could play them on a PC.
This has fundamentally been the Microsoft problem for as long as we can remember, right? They have tried to integrate games into Windows so many times, and it never works. It never freaking works, dude. Like, it's just the Games for Windows Live stuff, of course, the way they tried to do it in Vista, and then they tried again, they've tried all these different approaches, and it's always this weird half step that's annoying to use, doesn't really offer the real flexibility you're looking for. I mean, the UWP stuff was early on, especially, it was like an absolute just joke. And even now, like, I still think the Xbox storefront on PC isn't a very good app. It has issues. And sometimes it's like, it'll just do something and you're not sure why. And then fixing it requires jumping through an insane number of hoops in a way that's just like, wow, I can't believe this is still a thing.
So maybe an Xbox VM solves that problem.
They got to get it right. They've got to get that right. If they want this to work, they really need to put that R&D effort into making sure that they finally truly nail this in a way that they've never done it before.
I think there's an advantage that they've got in the handheld space, which is that it's all AMD at the moment, effectively. We've got the MSI Claw, which uses Intel, but it's not going to do great.
Not so good. Not so good.
But, basically everything else is either a Ryzen 7 7840U or the equivalent Z1 Extreme. If you're talking about ROG Ally, Legion Go, a whole host of those Chinese handhelds, some of which are really, really good. So, it's basically as close as you're going to get to a fixed platform. So, that is fertile ground, I think, for having like an Xbox VM running on a PC piece of hardware. It would work in the handheld space. And then maybe when you've got your next generation console, you set a new spec point. I mean, there's some good stuff that AMD are doing with their APUs. The potential of the new Strix Point APU, it's got a ton of compute power in it. It could do really, really well. I don't know. But in the handheld space, I think they've got the opportunity there, and I think they need to do something about it, and they need to do something about it sooner rather than later, because we've gone now through. We've got Steam Deck, which is, basically one platform, but we've already had 2 iterations of it. And as you know, John, that second iteration of the Steam Deck is scarily good if you're Microsoft.
It's so good, dude.
Yeah. So, the concept of actually getting involved sooner rather than later makes a lot of sense, because where is Microsoft going to be if they continue not to do something? Valve could be on Steam Deck 2 or Steam Deck 3, or, even Steam Deck 4 by the time, something happens on the Xbox side. And
Steam Deck 360.
it would be an opportunity missed. But that seems to be what Phil's talking about in this interview, that he seems to want to bring Xbox to handhelds in a way that doesn't sound much like the PC client, because although Play Anywhere is a thing, it's not the Xbox experience really that you really want, because Play Anywhere, the concept of Play Anywhere, of course, being that you can port your progress across from Xbox to PC and back again, and different PCs, obviously, but it's not being widely supported, and obviously it's just baked into the system on the Xbox side of things. Just kind of makes a bit more sense there. I guess the other thing, of course, is just the timescales. And we've had this tease from Phil that it's going to be happening, or maybe it was Sarah Bond that said it actually in the Business Update podcast, that we would be seeing news from Microsoft in the holiday period. So maybe we'll find out then. But again, I still think the future there is kind of what could possibly happen on Xbox consoles, which is front and center. You've got an Xbox app, but you would have the ability to run those third-party stores. Anything to add to that, Oliver? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I actually think that there is some interesting stuff here with the timelines, because if you go back to last September when we had that big leak of those Microsoft documents from the FTC trial, in May of 2022, in Exhibit 1517, they describe the idea of a handheld in their little triangle of things that they're doing as not being in scope for first party, right? So if something's changed in the last 22 months since then, there's every possibility that we won't be looking at custom silicon. That's my first thought, right? It could be something off the shelf in AMD's portfolio instead. It could be something like the 7840U or the 8840U, which is very similar, or Z1 Extreme, which is the 7840U, or off the shelf next gen silicon in the same power budget. And that's maybe a little disappointing. It would certainly suggest that there could be more commonality between the Xbox handheld and PC handhelds that are running the same silicon, and it could allow them to standardize, like you say, standardize around certain capabilities. But there would be some things that probably wouldn't be on the table, like a super wide GPU or a 128-bit memory interface, or things like that you might expect would be interesting additions potentially for a handheld platform, just spitballing there. But I think that the probability of it being truly custom silicon goes down a lot when you consider the timelines here. If this is going to be something that's released, say, in the next year and a half or so, it seems like a pretty short period, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What if, guys? What if it's Nvidia? What if there's teases and rumors we've heard, and they actually they got Nvidia silicon for a new handheld, and they blow even Nintendo out of the water? He's also using Nvidia, but just saying.
I think that would have to be done. There's some. It's an interesting conceit. The issue being that first of all, we need to know how good the Microsoft ARM recompiler is, because it's not going to be running x86 if it's an Nvidia chip. Right, that's
True,
pretty clear. Yeah. But there are. We've got this new Snapdragon. Is it the Snapdragon Elite SoC coming out, which is an ARM-based processor, but it is running Windows, and it's doing it via what is effectively emulation. It's a bit more complicated than that. I mean, we just don't know the performance level of that. I mean, we saw a report this week where the Snapdragon was running Baldur's Gate at 1080p 30, which would be quite a remarkable thing to see. I think it's too early right now to talk about ARM, possibly. And if the FTC sort of documents are sort of indicative of where Microsoft was at a particular time point, it would still be early days for a native handheld. But I still think that when you're looking at the handhelds that are out now, there are so many that are basically running the same specification. It would be nuts not to use that as the basis to get something out sooner rather than later. I think that could work really well.